Hey guys, Pastor Tanner here with First Baptist Church of Leadville, and I'm just here doing some interactive office hours on June 14th. It's Friday, and we got Father's Day coming up. So, what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to go through my Father's Day material and trying to put together a sermon for Father's Day, and hopefully I can get some good insight, some good information. I'm hoping today that I can get my main point, some of my key questions that I'm going to be asking, and just start making some progress in terms of kind of the ultimate direction I'm going. Still have tomorrow to finish it, Saturday, but I need to make a good amount of progress today. And so that's what I'm here trying to do. So, again, if you haven't been with me before on these interactive office hours, it's just an opportunity to interact with me while I do my sermon prep. So I'm going to prepare my sermon for Sunday, and if any of you would like to participate, ask me questions in the chat, anything like that, I'm right here and available. So please feel free to interact with me if you would like to. So I had decided last time on my text, I'm going to do the text of the prodigal son. And the prodigal son, I think, is going to be a good text for a couple reasons. But most importantly, we get a good picture of what it means to be a good father here in the parable of the prodigal son. We have the father acting in a way that is very admirable in terms of how he deals with his wayward son and also how he deals with his eldest son as well. So there's some good insight there that I think is important. The other thing I'm going to be trying to do in this sermon is I'm going to be trying to bring out aspects of true, good, proper masculinity so that I can explain what it means to be a strong male figure, a strong father in the lives of our children and in the lives of our families. And so I'll be doing that as well. And that will also come out of the parable of the prodigal son. So I'm going to try to integrate the two. I'm going to try to take the parable of the prodigal son, but I'm also going to try to flesh out some good ideas surrounding fatherhood and just masculinity in general. And so I'm really putting those two ideas together ultimately. And that's what I'll be doing. So I've got some quick ideas here, and I've also got my parable right here. And then I've got some other kind of potential directions that I could go in this section right here. Now, I think I've decided that I'm going to preach inductively on this passage. Inductive preaching is when you start with a question and you kind of reason to the conclusion. Now, the conclusion I want to get to is I want to follow roughly along these lines. Two types of men, elder brother, younger brother, and I want to talk about types of men, types of male characteristics, and then I want to go a direction to promote positive male characteristics. And then I want to talk about two types of religion, and then I want to get the direction finally of what are the religious characteristics that we're looking for in true and proper religion. So that's the direction I want to go. If I'm going to talk about the types of men and the types of religion, I need to be asking questions that will lend themselves to answering those sorts of things. So that essentially is where I need to be. Now, the big question for my proposition really is how can I incorporate the types of men and the types of religion together into one solid question that causes us to kind of dig deeper into these concepts. So we're going to be talking about Father's Day and what are male attributes? That might be a question, right? What are fatherly characteristics? But fatherly doesn't quite get at it because we have the elder brother and the younger brother, and they seem to indicate certain characteristics of maleness, masculinity, that aren't good or are not what we're looking for. So fatherly isn't enough. So I like the idea of male attributes. Maybe we'll go something like masculine traits maybe masculine traits and their religious consequences? Maybe something like that. You know, if we're talking about Father's Day and we want to incorporate both masculine traits and characteristics, but also religious ideas, we need to somehow put these together. So I think masculine traits and their religious consequences is a decent start in that direction. At least we're kind of leaning in the direction of this idea. Maybe what else could incorporate these two? Masculine traits and religious consequences. Maybe we have something like, well, I kind of like this idea. Now the question is, how do I get there? How do I get to this idea of masculine traits and their religious consequences? And right now I'm just brainstorming, really, trying to come up with what is the guts of what I want to communicate. And that's going to bring me about to the types of questions that I want to be asking as I go about this inductive sermon. I want to communicate masculinity for sure. That's key. And I also want to communicate, again, the religious truths that the elder brother and the younger brother both have in the text. You know what's interesting? Something we have in both the brothers is they try to mimic masculinity, if you will, in some sort of sense. So maybe it's something like true and false masculinity. That might be an idea. Because the younger brother acts one way. Verse 13, he goes out to a distant country and he squanders his wealth in wild living. He acts one way. And then the elder brother acts another way. Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. So both of them have a certain type of masculinity, but both of them have a false sense of masculinity, whereas the father has true masculinity. So let's go false masculinity, younger brother, elder brother, true masculinity, father. Now it's not only masculinity, but it's also they also all three of us all three of them have religious truths to teach us as well. The younger brother teaches us a religious truth about where not to find our worth. The older brother teaches us a religious truth about where not to find our worth, and then the father teaches us it teaches us religious truth as well, and he teaches us the proper religious truth. So not only do we have a true and false masculinity in this text, but we also have a true and false religion. Now, I need to tie masculinity to religion in order to bear out this fact. That way, if I tie masculinity and religion together, I can emphasize the fact that we have a true masculinity, a true religion. We have false masculinities and false religions, and they go together. Now, how can I tie together masculinity and religion? I'm intrigued by Piper and what he had to say about masculinity. Yeah, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab Piper's article. So I'm going to search here real quick. Basic search. Piper near Ryle, because he wrote an article on J.C. Ryle. This might be it. Yes, this is it. The Journal for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, The Frank and Manly Mr. Ryle by John Piper. So here is what is interesting. This is how I can tie together masculinity and religion right here. Piper says, from all this, I conclude God has given Christianity a masculine feel. And being a God of love, he has done it for the maximum flourishing of men and women. He did not create women to languish or to be frustrated or in any way to suffer or fall short of full and lasting joy in a masculine Christianity. She is fellow heir in the grace of life, from which I infer the fullest flourishing of women and men takes place in churches and families where Christianity has the God-ordained masculine feel. So he's got this emphasis on masculinity, and he ties it directly to Christianity. And so while I may not follow Piper's logic exactly, he has a way of tying together masculinity and Christianity here that I think will be helpful for a Father's Day sermon. You know, something I noted in here when I was taking my notes was, where is it? Why are men leaving our churches in droves? Why are men leaving our churches in droves? We have churches that are full, in a sense, of women, and there are very, very few men who are truly taking on a masculine role in our churches. And so I need somehow to tie them together in order to promote a solid message that will challenge our fathers, but also encourage our families. So that's the direction I need to go. And that might be the question I need to use. Why are men leaving our churches in droves? So that might be my starting question. I might lead into that with the introduction. Now, in order to get there through the introduction, I might promote something like talking about how the Bible and religion in general are partially driven by masculinity. So I could talk about how the Bible, religion in general, partially driven by masculinity. I can discuss some of these aspects maybe that Piper talks about here in this section. And then I can lead up to this question. If the Bible and religion in general are partially driven by masculinity, if maleness is so inherent to many biblical passages and biblical texts, why then are men leaving our churches in droves? See, that's a great question, I think, that will flow into this. Now, I have to be sure if I'm going to put this question as kind of that leading question to gain interest, I have to ask myself, does our text answer this question, right? And that is an important point. You don't want to lead with a question to gather interest that you're not going to be able to answer. And so, does the text answer why our men are leaving the church in droves? Essentially, the text tells us that we conceive of masculinity incorrectly and we conceive of religion incorrectly. And if we had a right conception of masculinity and we had a right conception of religion, then that would capture the hearts. I like this idea. Capture the hearts and imaginations of our young men. We conceive incorrectly of both masculinity and religion. Just getting some ideas here, and I'll kind of formulate them into a better outline in the future. Why are men leaving our churches in droves? We're on the right track. Let's see what John Piper has to say about this masculine bent to Christianity. He says, in dealing with the life and ministry of J.C. Ryle, my hope is to clarify and commend what I value about masculine ministry. But before we turn to the frank and manly Mr. Ryle, let me make some clarifying comments from the Bible. God revealed himself as king, not queen, father, not mother. The second person of the Trinity is the eternal Son. The Father and the Son created man and woman in his image and gave them together. Together he gave them the name Adam. God appoints all priests in Israel to be men. The Son of God comes into the world as a man, not a woman. He chooses 12 men to be his apostles. The apostles tell the churches that all the overseers, the pastors, elders who teach and have authority should be men, and that in the home, it is the head who bears the special responsibility to lead, protect, and provide. This is the husband. There's all his biblical evidence. And he says, from all this, I conclude that God has given Christianity a masculine feel. I think that's appropriate. I think I can pretty much take that as is. Now, I'm going to have to preface it. This is something that if you come right out the gate, especially in our modern day culture and society, and just start blasting off with this stuff, that's going to be very discouraging to a lot of people. And we're very sensitive right now to patriarchal statements or claims. So I need to be careful about that. I wonder when Piper preached this message. Let's see if it's that's too long. When is this published? 2012. So that's relevant. That's 7 years ago, before Trump and all those sorts of things. So it's very relevant. We're much more sensitive to these things now. But I think I can read that flat out. See, because I'm teeing up my own question here. If I talk about how manly the Bible is, how, in a sense, patriarchal, and of course we don't mean it in the sense that that's typically taken, but if we talk about these aspects and just quote Piper, and then that tees up my question. If the Bible is so masculine, why aren't there any men? Why aren't there any strong men? Why are men leaving the church in droves? I think that's a good tee up right there. And then that can lead me into true and false masculinity. I think that's good. I'm going to start let's see. I'm going to start my Canvas right now. So I'll do a new Canvas document. Now what Canvas is, if you guys haven't seen this before, is the way I do my outlines is I do them in a visual form. So I'll pull up a previous outline. Here's a previous outline of mine. This is the sermon I preached last Sunday on this journey of kingdom citizenship. And you can see here, this is how it's essentially an outline. This is the intro, this is the conclusion. These are the three main points in between. But you can see it's in a visual format. I actually work from the upper right corner and I work clockwise until I'm back to the upper left corner, and that's how I put together my sermons. So I'm going to start creating my next Canvas document real quick here. Let's throw this right here. And we've got a new canvas. I'm going to title this. This is not Mark 4, 1 to 20, but instead this is Luke. And I forget my exact passage. I know it's the prodigal son, I just forget the verses. 15, 11 to 32. Luke 15, 11 to 32. 15, 11 to 32. And then I'm not the journey of kingdom citizenship. Rather, this sermon is going to be about true and false masculinity and religion. That might be a good way to put it right off the bat. True and false masculinity and religion. Hold on one moment. I'm receiving a phone call. Sorry about that, guys. Trying to get some church business coordinated, so I apologize. Okay, so we're going to be talking about true and false masculinity and religion. That's the direction we're going. So I'm going to throw that right here. True and false masculinity and religion. Let's make that nice and big. Then I'll stick it right here in the middle. And let's get a little intro going. Intro. Okay, and now we can start fleshing out our idea. So first, the first thing I'm going to do in my intro is I'm going to read my text. So that's going to be my Luke 15:11 to 32. And then I'm probably going to want to do my John Piper quote. And so with that, I can put this down right here. And I can just say John Piper quote 1. And then what I'll do on a separate page just below this, I will put my John Piper quote. So let's go grab what he has to say. Boom, boom. So I can put this down right here. And this will be a separate page that I can print out, and I can make sure I have my quote on it. Now, I can't just lead with this. I have to preface it a little bit. So maybe I'll put my John Piper quote up here in the corner. I've got my Luke first, and then in between that, I am going to have to say a few words. So I can say religions are typically driven by male figures. And I can give some references. So we can maybe do Muhammad, Joseph Smith. And I'm intend at first to communicate the fact that whenever we see a new religion, it seems to be males who establish it, right? So what I'm trying to do first and foremost is to point out that we typically see new religions surrounding men. And then I'm going to read John Piper's quote. And what I'm trying to do is show a difference between, some people might be sitting there thinking like, yeah, why is it always men who establish new religions? And we're going to contrast these false religions that have been established by men with the fact that God has established his true religion, but also through typically men. And so that'll show that in our case, while it's still established by men, it's still distinguished from it because it's God ordained. And he has shown us many things in a God ordained fashion. And then that will lead us up to the question if Christianity's roots are so masculine, why is Christianity as we see it today so feminine? And I might not put it exactly that way, but that's a good way to start with it. And it just brings out the question. And in what sense do I mean feminine? Well, most of your churchgoers are female today. A lot of men don't go to church. And in a couple relationship where there's a man who's in the relationship and a woman who's in the relationship, it's typically the woman who goes to church and the man who does not. And so I think that's relevant as well. So this is just a start. I could develop it from there. So we've got Muhammad, we've got Joseph Smith. Surely there's other false religions that have been propagated by men. Well, they don't even have to be false either. We could even say Abraham. He's the foundation of many religions. You know, I should even open before this with something about gender in today's society. Gender is a hot button issue today. I could open with the fact that gender is hot button, and if gender is a hot button issue today, how do we speak to males? Gender is a hot button issue today. Smash the patriarchy comes to mind. There's these ideas of the patriarchy as being part of our issue. And then I can tie it into traditional historical patriarchal frameworks, right? So Luke 15:11-32, gender's a hot button issue today. This conception of smash the patriarchy would be interesting. And then I can tie into religious developments and essentially say they aren't wrong. This idea of smash the patriarchy is the idea that male dominated cultures and religions have been driven. And so they're not wrong to recognize that. But the question is quote unquote smashing it the thing we want to do? That might be the critical question. Is smashing the patriarchy what we want to do, or is there a better thing we can do? We must recognize, if we're going to be honest with the data, we must recognize that there is a decided male influence when it comes to religion today. It is typically a male influence that has established those types of things. Your Mary Eddy Bakers and figures like that are relatively uncommon in history. They are the exception, not the rule. So I could read the parable of the prodigal son. Let's pray. I can talk about how gender is a hot button issue today, and this idea that smash the patriarchy or a male dominated influence in culture and society is not what we ought to have, according to many. They say that's not what we ought to have, as a male dominated influence in society. And so I can talk about that, and then I can say we have to recognize that there's some truth to these claims, because religions are typically driven by male figures down through history. I'll put historically. Religions are driven typically by male figures. And then I can mention Muhammad, Joseph Smith, Abraham, and of course there are many others I could dig into, but I don't think I will. I don't think this is a terribly contentious claim. I think most people would grant these things. I'll mention Abraham first, so it seems a bit more neutral. Abraham, Muhammad, Joseph Smith were all male figures who spearheaded certain religious movements. And I can say there's something to that. There's something we must recognize about that. And then I can say that this is true not just of false religions, but of biblical religion as well. And then we have to ask ourselves, if this is true of biblical religion, is it something God did on accident or on purpose, right? Did it just so happen that the majority of people God wanted to work through were men, or did he do this on purpose? And if he did this on purpose, then there must be some sort of significance to it. There must be some sort of reason that he established it this way. Not just so men could rule the world or something like that, but because there is something about masculinity that lends itself to promoting faith in God. And then we can move on from there. True, not just of false religions, but biblical. So I think that'll go well. I think people will follow that line of thinking. Religions, look, we're here on Father's Day. We're trying to celebrate dads. But the fact of the matter is that gender is a hot button issue today. And if I'm here to kind of come in and say, this is what masculinity looks like, this is what we should do, how am I not running counter to a lot of the claims in society today that say, in a sense, smash the patriarchy? The problem with society is that we're too male centric, too male driven, all of these things. I can then speak to this isn't wrong, this conception of smash the patriarchy. I'm not that we should necessarily smash it, or not that I'm granting that there's necessarily a patriarchy, but this idea, this inherent feeling that maleness has been very dominant in society for the last thousands and thousands of years is true, and we have to recognize that. And so we grant that, we talk about it, and then we say, so if it's true, is it true because it's wrong or bad? Or is it true because God has a plan with that as well? That's where I can do my John Piper quote, and that'll be right down here. And then I can lead into my first question, my leading question that is essentially supposed to grip people's minds and make them want to listen to the message. If Christianity's roots are so masculine, why is Christianity as we see it today so feminine? Now, I think the way I've put this right now, this is a bit, I don't know if controversial is the right word, but it might be a bit triggering, if you will, without intending to be. So I like the first half. If Christianity's roots are so masculine, why? And so maybe we don't say, is Christianity as we see it today so feminine, but maybe we say, why are men leaving the church in droves? I like that more because, see, this seems to almost feed into pitting men against women, and I don't want to do that. But my point is really to bring out the fact that we have a masculine religion, supposedly, according to Piper and looking down through this data. We have a masculine religion that men aren't drawn to, they're not attracted to, they don't seem to care about it. There aren't a lot of manly men in the church. And those that are there are basically taught to be a bit more feminine, if you will. And so how do we promote true masculinity in the church? And then we can tie into our idea, true and false masculinity and religion. So I think this is a good leading question. If Christianity's roots are so masculine, why are men leaving the church in droves? And then we can begin to answer that question. So we're going to preach inductive, and this is the leading question. So now how are we answering this later in the sermon? We've already done most of our research. So later in the sermon, we're going to answer this by men are leaving the church because they aren't being challenged with true masculinity. Men are essentially taught in churches to be more feminine. Men are full of passion, vigor, fire, energy, all of these things, and typically Those type of men are the men you see fighting fires and going to war and all of these type of things. They don't see church as a place where they can express those masculine characteristics. And I think the challenge for this Sunday is going to be the church is a place where we can express these masculine characteristics. In fact, it's a place where it's most needed. And so I think this is an answer we can get to a little bit later in the sermon. So I like the direction this is going. It ties masculinity and religion together, and I'll be able to use the three characters in the parable of the prodigal son to emphasize aspects of true masculinity and true religion rather than following the false masculinity and false religion that is so prevalent in the text. And by in the text, I mean specifically as exemplified by the younger brother and the elder brother. So I think our main points now are going to be false masculinity, and we're going to show that in both the elder and the younger brother. And then I can speak to true masculinity. And this will be the father and the sort of characteristics and attributes he has that are emphasized. So we'll go younger brother here. Now the younger brother's false masculinity is found in sensuality. He goes out and spends all of his inheritance in wild living. He just goes out and lives wildly. And so he looks on the outside like he's being very masculine, right? But his masculinity is false. It's not true. But he's not the only one in the story who has a false masculinity. The elder brother also has a false masculinity. Elder brother. What's his false masculinity? He is very obedient, and he thinks, and he is bound to duty, right? And so he thinks that doing your duty is what it means to be masculine, and he's wrong. And the younger brother thinks that sensuality, going out and living wildly, sowing your wild oats, as it were, he thinks that's masculinity, and he's wrong as well. So the elder brother and the younger brother both have a false sense of masculinity, whereas the father exemplifies true masculinity. So I think this is coming together. I like the ideas that are being presented, and I like the structure. So we have the elder brother, and I'm going to have room over here, so I'm going to move it over. The younger brother and the elder brother both exemplify some false masculinity, and then the father exemplifies true masculinity. All right, I like how this is coming together. Now, how does the father exemplify true masculinity? This is seen in several spots. First, let's see. I had all these listed. First, the father shows compassion and unconditional love. Second, he demonstrates wisdom. Third, he seeks out reconciliation. He doesn't wait for it to come to him. Fourth, he's gentle. But fifth, he's also firm. He's all of these things together. And it is this combination of characteristics and attributes that lends itself to true masculinity. Wisdom, compassion and unconditional love, reconciliation, gentleness, and firmness. These 5 aspects really go to the heart of masculinity as we've seen it. And so I'm just going to write these down. Gentleness, wisdom. And these will all be great opportunities to encourage and motivate the congregation. Firm, compassion. Remember, these are all manly, masculine attributes. These are all manly characteristics. Because again, we're preaching on Father's Day, and we want to encourage our people, the fathers, and we also want to encourage our mothers to raise their sons in ways that go to these attributes and characteristics. These are kind of the 5 keys that we want to hone in on. So compassion, gentleness, wisdom, being firm, and I had one more. What was it? Compassion, wisdom, reconciliation. And reconciliation, I think, just boils down to action. In this passage, they're taking well, no, not in this passage. I think the masculine attribute is action, and I think the way it's exemplified in this passage in the parable of the prodigal son is through reconciliation. So I want to make sure I get that right. Reconciliation is the action that is taken by the Father. Okay, now the next thing, I want to create some sort of, I've got 5 attributes I want people to follow here. That's a lot. You're asking people to remember a lot when you give them 5. So the question is, can we come up with an acronym that incorporates all of these, or maybe a little saying? So we've got AFWGC. It's gonna be tough with only one with only one vowel. Wag. Yeah, it's gonna be tough. The other thing you can create is, so I'm gonna do this. And I'm gonna try to, let's left justify these. I'm gonna try to come up with some sort of saying maybe that, so some sort of saying that I can try to tell people to remember so they can remember these 5 attributes that are masculine that the Father exemplifies that we want to cultivate. So men, males, Adam. So A, I think I'm going to try to go with Adam for A. So Adam will glorify Father. I left out the C. And this is just something I don't have to do this, but it's something that it might make things more memorable for the audience if I can come up with a good 5-word statement that will help people to remember these are the attributes of masculinity. Maybe we could do could Adam glorify the Father? Then I lose my W. Could Adam glorify the Father? W. Well, we might be able to incorporate some of these together. I had could. See, I'm struggling with the C and the W. Can these go together somehow? Compassion and wisdom. I kind of don't think so. They're separate ideas. Now, compassion and gentleness can go together. Compassion and gentleness could go together. So if we lose, it could be gentleness and compassion, and we could go will Adam glorify the Father. And the glorify goes with gentleness and compassion. We could do that. So that would be wisdom, action, gentleness and compassion, and being firm. Wisdom, action, firm, will Adam glorify his Father or the Father? I think that's good too, because I think people will understand if we emphasize gentleness. I'm sorry, firm is last. Will Adam glorify gentleness and compassion? I think people are going to have a hard time remembering a 5-word acronym. I think a 4-word acronym is going to be a lot easier for people to remember. Both gentleness and compassion. They're related, right? If we're gentle with people, we're going to have compassion. If we're compassionate on people, if we're compassionate towards people, we're going to be gentle with them. So I think those go together. And then being firm. I think that actually works, guys. This is the first time I've come up with like a little acronym. But I was just getting so many attributes under this true masculinity that I didn't want it to get too muddy. I didn't want them to get lost. So I think that's a good way of doing it. And so I'm going to put this and the reason I use Adam is the Hebrew word for man. Because I'm talking about man, males. Will Adam glorify his father? And I might move this over a little bit if I don't need anything else here. So then I will talk about, will Adam glorify his father? Talk about the 4 attributes of true masculinity. And then I can say, not only does this parable teach us something about masculinity, true and false, but it also teaches us something about religion. And that is going to be the next point we go into. So we're going to go false religion. And then we'll go true religion. So we've got false masculinity and true masculinity. We'll have false religion and true religion. And then we'll essentially speak to that application. Now I'm getting quite far along. I've got the big framework, and I'm going to fill in these details later with some of the, little sentences I'm going to say, the little phrases I'm going to point to. But we've got the big picture. We've got a good intro that introduces the idea we're trying to talk about. We've got a good hook. This is inductive, so you want a really good question that is going to grab people's attention. If Christianity's roots are so masculine, why are men leaving the church in droves? And everyone's going to go, yeah, why is that? Right? At least that's your goal. I got to listen to this because this is going to tell me that answer. We're going to say, well, and this is where now I want to work. How are my transitions going to look? How am I going to transition from each idea, each thought? Typically, you want questions that will lead to each one, right? So, why are men leaving the church in droves? So, the first question I can ask is something to the effect of, well, what is masculinity really? If Christianity's roots are so masculine, why are men leaving the church in droves? The first question we need to answer in order to figure this bigger question out is, well, what is masculinity, right? And so that might lead people to go, okay, if we can answer what masculinity is, that might lead us to answering this bigger question. What is masculinity? And society gives us 2 answers as to what masculinity is. And they're exemplified in both the elder brother and the younger brother. The younger brother has one conception of masculinity, that is sensuality. Masculinity is to go out and sow your wild oats, to eat red meat, and to, that stereotypical tobacco chewing, whiskey drinking cowboy figure. That's masculinity, right? No, that's the younger brother's version of masculinity. And then, okay, maybe there's a more noble version of masculinity. Masculinity means to do your duty. Masculinity means to act the right way. That's the elder brother's version of masculinity. Also wrong. And so we can talk about that a little bit. Well, then what is true masculinity? If this is false masculinity, the younger and the elder brother, what is true masculinity? True masculinity is exemplified in the father. And I have 4 points to speak to true masculinity. I've put together a little acronym. Will Adam glorify the father? Will Adam glorify the father? W stands for wisdom. Adam stands for action. The G, glorify, stands for gentleness, and father stands for firm, right? And so will Adam glorify the father? And he does that through exemplifying true masculinity. And then I can speak to each one of these. What do they look like? I can give illustrations and applications to wisdom, action, gentleness, firmness. I'm going to put firmness. All of these are attributes or aspects of masculinity that can be emphasized. And so then I will be able to go into this is what true masculinity looks like. Juxtaposed against the false masculinity of the younger brother and the older brother, we have true masculinity as exemplified by the father. And it comes out in these 4 traits and characteristics. And I can speak about those. Then, where are we going to go? How are we going to transition from that? Again, questions are the driving transitions in an inductive sermon. You have to ask good questions that cause people to think and cause people to want to listen for the answer. You have to ask these good questions that make people go, yeah, I wonder what the answer to that is, right? And so this is our big overarching question. Then we're going to ask, what is masculinity? We need to ask another question, though, after we get here. So this is the world's version of masculinity. So now, after we've gone through this first point, what false masculinity is, then we have another question that will lead into the next transition. What is true masculinity? Or what is biblical? True or biblical? I think true. Because I'm going to make the contention in this first section that these masculinities, as exemplified by the younger and elder brother, are false masculinities. They're not actually true masculinities. And so then that's going to beg the question, well, then what is true masculinity? Tanner, you've told me 2 versions of masculinity that aren't real. What is actual true masculinity? And then I can go into this whole section on the father and the true masculinity that he exemplifies. So that'll be our next leading question. This one, then that one, then that one. And then what's our next follow-up question? So we've got this, we've got that. What is true masculinity? Okay, so by the time we're done with point number 2, we're going to have answered what true masculinity is. We've lost all the tension from that part. But we can proceed to the next step of our larger question. If Christianity's roots are so masculine, why are men leaving the church in droves? And then this will lead to that answer. Why are men leaving the church in droves? The men are leaving the church in droves because we don't have a proper conception of religion. That's going to be the idea. So now we have to think of a transition out of masculinity into religion. And I don't know what that transitional question is going to be. So I'm just going to put this off to the side for now because I need to figure out how to go from this topic to that topic. So we'll put this here for now. Then we will talk about false religion. And then that's going to lead itself to the same question we had here, but regarding religion. What is true religion? And then under this heading, we should be able to get at our answer. Many are leaving the church because they aren't being challenged with true masculinity and religion. We need both, and they need to be real, proper versions of those things. Men are being fed false conceptions of what masculinity is, and so they follow those things. But the problem is the alternatives that we offer aren't compelling. And so we need to offer true versions of masculinity that show that you can be a man, but we also need to offer true versions of religion that show that even being a man, you can be spiritual and you can be religious. And the father is the perfect figure in this parable who toes that line, and he kind of is able to show balance there. What is true masculinity? From masculinity to religion. What is true religion? And then I think we'll have a final question. This will be a big application question. How can we keep Bring or keep. Maybe it's bring or keep. Bring or keep men to the church / in the church. That might be the answer right here. This might be then the big overarching question that we want to answer at the end. Now, I wonder if my initial question would be less compelling if I put that in there instead. If Christianity's roots are so masculine, how can we bring keep men in or to or in the church? No, I think it's just a follow-up question. So we're going to resolve all the tension in the sermon with this answer, but it's going to be well into the sermon that we do it. So that's good. And then we'll kind of have a final application-oriented question that's going to be this one here. I think that'll work. And I need a new color arrow, guys. I've used up all my colors. I only have yellow, blue, red, green, and orange. So let's make another arrow. Let's see, what color do we want to make this guy? Color. We're not on text, we want style. Let's see, we don't have a purple arrow yet. Let's do purple. Boom. This is what happens when you go inductive. It gets kind of messy, and you get a lot of different directions you're going. Typically, I only have 3 main points, but these aren't like really main points per se. You know, they're just it's kind of a flow. It's a main flow that we're going to follow. And so this will be the final application question. How can we bring / keep men to or in the church? And I'm gonna clean up that language a little later. But this is where we're gonna have major points of application. And it's gonna bear out everything we've said so far. And I already know like one illustration here is gonna be on video games. So many of our young men today are addicted to video games because they offer some sort of challenge. They offer some sort of, they promise something they can't deliver. And so that's going to be definitely one application here. And not that I'm completely against video games. I like video games and play them myself, but I've seen many young men get addicted to video games, and they spend so much of their energy, their passion on video games because it gives them a challenge. And we can give them a challenge in the church. That's going to be the message for Sunday. We want to challenge our young men. We want to give them a challenge that they want to seek. And that challenge is going to be gather wisdom, gain wisdom. There's so much wisdom out there to be had by you if you would just go gather it, right? We want them to take action in life. We want them to be gentle and compassionate towards others, but we also want them to be firm. And cultivating these attributes and these characteristics is going to be very, very difficult. But we want to challenge our young men with this. This is what we need to be teaching our sons, and this is what we need to be, the message we need to be communicating to our fathers in the church. You need to exemplify these characteristics. Where are you weak? Build that up. Are you not wise? Gain knowledge and see how knowledge applies. Are you passive? Do you not take action? Then take action in your life. See, and start with being reconciled to others, right? And so these will be steps that we can take, applications that we can give to our people. So I will talk about video games at some point. Okay, I think we're going somewhere, guys. I think we got a good breakdown. How long have I been streaming for? I've been over an hour, and I've got what I need for the day. You know what? I hate to do it because my last 2 streams have been nearly 2 hours, but I think I'm going to call it for today. I've got a really good framework, and tomorrow I'm going to flesh out these details a little bit more, I think. And so I do have a little bit of free time. Is there any Q&A from anyone in the chat? Be happy to answer any questions, interact with you guys. Anyone have any questions or comments? If I don't see anything, come over for a little bit, then I'll probably call it for the day. All right, guys. Well, I think it was productive today. I was excited to get this going. I started an hour ago with just these texts, right? These notes, the books I've read this week to try and gain some insights into this passage. And I love the process of putting it into an outline format, especially I do this visual one that really helps me. And I was also able to formulate a bit of an introduction as well. So I think today was very profitable. I made a lot of progress. And tomorrow I'll try to stream again during a reasonable time, and I can start fleshing out some of these details. That way I'm prepared for Sunday to preach a sermon that hopefully is compelling and helpful to people and encouraging to them. So anyway, that's going to be the direction I'm going. As always, I'm trying to do these interactive office hours regularly so that I can interact with you guys in the chat and so you guys can see my process as well. Please feel free to ask me any questions or comments and anything like that. I appreciate everyone who popped in today. I saw some people pop in and out randomly, and I appreciate that. And anyone who's watching this later on, I hope you find this helpful and encouraging to you as well. I hope you have a great Friday night and that God blesses you tonight. And I hope that you have a great weekend and that God will prepare your heart for Sunday to glorify and worship Him there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see all of you later. Bye now.